Good morning and welcome to Marjorie's table in this last day of March. I was just congratulating anyone who's writing with us live this morning because the clocks have only just changed 24 hours ago, so it feels a little like 6:30 to me this morning, although the light is still good. So if you were with me in January, what a huge change to not have to bring lots of lights behind the screen so you could actually see my face in the writing. So welcome. Like every other one of these little half an hour sessions, we'll do a quick warm up. We'll look at, and today we're going to look at 3 different poems because I'm greedy. I'll give you time to write to 2 prompts in the time remaining, and then I'll give you a takeaway prompt. I'll also give you some craft notes, but it's always really interesting to hear what you think if you're here with us live. In the chat box, I'll read those comments out as we go along or later after the writing prompt, because it's often interesting to find that you disagree with me. And that's a really important and interesting thing for us to note, that we all have different responses to poems. Marjorie's table every day in April starts tomorrow. It's not too late to sign up. It's never too late to sign up. You can sign up across the month. If you need a bursary place, just reach out to me on email or by DM, and I will send you the code that will let you into a bursary place. But there's already a big gang of us doing that, and I hope you'll join us for that too. Okay, without further ado, let's get started. The warm up, I'm going to do the usual kind of thing this morning, giving you 2 separate words to write a list to. Any list is fine. You will not have to explain how you got there. If you end up with a list of what you ate for breakfast or would like to have for breakfast, that's absolutely fine. But the first word this morning is the word smooth. Whatever comes to mind with the word smooth, make a list of words, just word association, whatever comes to mind with the word smooth. Okay, now swap and do prickly. Well, I try and spell that in the chat box. Prickly. Okay, as ever, if you're willing, if you're with us live and willing to share 2 or 3 of your words in the chat box, that would be great. It's really nice to look out for other people's words. Write them on your list, and then try and use a couple that you'd like the sound of in your own writing. I'll forget to say that when we get to the prompt. So try and use a couple of words from someone else if you can, if you really want to challenge yourself, or even from your own lists this morning in your writing. The surface of newly planed wood, beautiful. That's just, yeah, what a beautiful image. Silver tongued, elbow, cool box, unbroken, slippy, buttery, one note, lovely, untouchable. Mill pond puddle, love that. Talker, jazz, segue into, that's a beautiful image. Unruffled, I'm just reading them as I see them. Cacti, sea urchin, brambled, perfectly stitched, says the surgical nurse. Iced over pond. Bank of Teasels. I don't think I know what a teasel is, but I'll need to go and look. Okay, I'll stop there and I'll show us the poem. But if you're live, you'll be able to see all these words in the chat box. Choose a couple that you like the sound of, scribble them on your page, or just scribble them as I'm reading them out, and then try and use them in your writing. I'm also going to say, because I always forget to say it, if I ask you to write about something this morning or any morning that you're writing with me, and in fact, you really need to write about your grandmother or the situation somewhere in the world or how terrible your cup of coffee tastes, please do that. The whole point of these exercises or these workshops is so that you can get writing. And if you really feel like you need to write about something this morning, write that. It's okay. Or write something else that you see in the poem. This morning, we are going to look at, oh no, that's the wrong one. Here we are. A poem by Paul Muldoon. Hopefully you can see that, called Hedgehog. And we have a recording of him reading it, which is always better than me doing it. So we'll listen to him read it first. Actually, before we do that, let me pop this in the chat box, the link in the chat box, so that if you would like to see it yourself, because I know sometimes it's harder to see things on the screen, it's in the chat box for you to have a look at. Okay, here we go.
Hedgehog. The snail moves like a hovercraft, held up by a rubber cushion of itself, sharing its secret with the hedgehog. The hedgehog shares its secret with no one. We say, "Hedgehog, come out of yourself and we will love you." We mean no harm. We want only to listen to what you have to say. We want your answers to our questions. The hedgehog gives nothing away, keeping itself to itself. We wonder what a hedgehog has to hide, why it so distrusts. We forget the God under this crown of thorns. We forget that never again will a God trust in the world.
So lovely to hear his voice, that I think we'll listen to him read it again. But actually, this time before we do that, I'm just going to point out a couple of things that I noticed reading the poem before I heard him read it. It would be great to hear what you think of the poem too. I notice how many times we get we as we move through the second half of the poem. Listen out for those we's. And I think that if you've heard me talk about editing work, and this is the only time we'll get craft, we'll move on to generative time later. So forget all these comments later, but as we're writing. You'll notice that you'll know that I think that words that are repeated kind of ring in a way in the brain. We definitely hear them. And so it's a decision, always a decision to repeat a word or repeat a word many times as he does in this poem. And so the question for us is, why is the we in there over? We say, we mean, we want, and then we wonder, and then twice we forget. So, he's definitely bringing that arrow, if there was one in the poem, that linguistic arrow to the word we. And the question is, why? Maybe it's because, in my mind, it's because we're always the center of everything in our universe, even though perhaps we're not. It would be interesting to know why you think, what you think about that. But look at that we as he reads it again, because it's a really interesting decision to circle the end of the poem into the reader or the we. Here we go. Let's listen to it again. Also, I should say, since I'm always banging on about form, note the form here, 4-line stanzas. Note what that does to you as a listener or a reader. We know where we are, so we're not worrying about form. So we're into this poem entirely.
Hedgehog. The snail moves like a hovercraft, held up by a rubber cushion of itself, sharing its secret with the hedgehog. The hedgehog shares its secret with no one. We say, "Hedgehog, come out of yourself and we will love you." We mean no harm. We want only to listen to what you have to say. We want your answers to our questions. The hedgehog gives nothing away, keeping itself to itself. We wonder what a hedgehog has to hide, why it so distrusts. We forget the God under this crown of thorns. We forget that never again will a God trust in the world.
Okay, hopefully you then heard those wheeze ring out and how it somehow becomes centered about us rather than the hedgehog, which I think is really interesting. And as someone pointed out, you don't see that last line coming. It's always interesting. And as you come towards the end of writing a poem, to try and flip it into something bigger, but holding that bigger idea off until you get to the bottom of a poem is always a challenge, I think, and not setting out writing about the big thing. If he'd started with, we forget that never will a God trust in the world, the poem would somehow lose its impact. So that's always an interesting thing to try and do, or try and do later in some ways while you're editing. First prompt, we've got one prompt, and then I'm just greedy. I'm going to show you another hedgehog poem because I love the second one too. But the first prompt is the idea of trying to coax something or someone out of themselves with or without success. Who is someone you've tried to coax out of themselves, or perhaps you have a pet or an animal, or even yourself, trying to coax yourself out of yourself, in a social situation or even out of bed. However it comes to you, you've got a list of words. It's 44 minutes past. I'll probably give us 6 minutes this morning for this first one, and then I'll give us a second prompt. I'll pop that into the chat box just now. You're still writing just another 30 seconds or so. Okay. If you're still going, maybe make notes about where you're going and we'll move on. Or mute me and keep writing as suits you. So unusually for today, we're going to look at a second poem for the second prompt because there's another hedgehog hog poem that I love um, so much that I wanted to introduce it beside Paul Muldoon so that you could see a different one. Let me pop it into the chat box. This is Ada Limon's Give Me This. If you don't know her, go and discover her work. She is the current Poet Laureate of the US. And there is still a recording of me interviewing her on the Edinburgh International Book Festival's website. I'll pop it into the email that'll come out later today with the links so that you can watch any of that if you like. Here we go. Ada Limon reading Give Me This.
This is Ada Limón reading Give Me This. I thought it was the neighbor's cat, back to clean the clock of the fledgling robins low in their nest stuck in the dense hedge by the house. But what came was much stranger. A liquidity moving all muscle and bristle. A groundhog, slippery and waddle, thieving my tomatoes, still green in the morning shade. I watched her munch and stand on her haunches, taking such pleasure in the watery bites. Why am I not allowed delight? A stranger writes to request my thoughts on suffering. Barbed wire pulled out of the mouth as if demanding that I kneel to the trap of coiled spikes used in warfare and fencing. Instead, I watch the groundhog closer, and a sound escapes me, a small spasm of joy I did not imagine when I woke. She is a funny creature and earnest, and she's doing what she can to survive.
So it's a hedgehog, not a it's a groundhog, not a hedgehog. Apologies. I've got my hogs confused. But it's that same beast waddling in to eat tomatoes. So with this poem, I'm not going to talk about craft, but notice your own response to the difference in form here. Such a different style of writing. There's a clip of me talking about balance and using this particular poem as an example. I'll also include that in the email that you get later today. But what I want you to write about is a time that you were interrupted. In this poem, her gardening is interrupted because something comes out and eats the things she's been growing. But a moment or a time when something or someone interrupted a plan or the beginning of some hard piece of work or in the middle or the end of some hard piece of work. And I'll leave you to that. I'll pop that in the chat box. That moment you're interrupted. It can be small or it can be big. It doesn't matter. But just think of a moment when you were interrupted. Try and keep your writing to a very specific moment because often if it gets too big and becomes too big of a story, it's really hard to tackle in one short piece. It's 54 minutes past. I'll give us probably 5 minutes max on this one, and then I'll bring us together for a final poem as ever. I'll pop that in the chat box. Just another minute or so. We'll probably run over a minute or so. Apologies on that. Okay, I'm going to pull this together to read one last poem by Paul Muldoon. It was a Paul Muldoon day, and Ada Limón stuck her nose in. Just, if you know me, you know how much I love her work, so I couldn't help it. Here's an older poem of his. I've popped the link to it in the chat box in case you're finding it hard to see. These older poems on poetry often just show the page, which means the font is a bit low, but it's a tiny little poem, and I'll leave you with a prompt to keep working on as we say goodbye. Apple slump. The bounty threat of snow in October, our apple mound, some boxer fallen foul of a right swing, waiting for his second to throw. The sound, turn up the sound, that mean little towel into the ring. I'll read it one more time. Apple slump. The bounty threat of snow in October, our apple mound, some boxer, fallen foul of a right swing, waiting for his second to throw. The sound, turn up the sound, that mean little towel into the ring. Again, look at the form here. It's just beautiful and so purposeful. So I'll leave you with that little apple slump poem. The prompt is a moment you were waiting to throw your towel into the ring, throw your towel in and be done with something. So the opposite of being interrupted, sometime when you were waiting to give up or hoping to give up or knowing you were going to have to give up, however it comes to you. I'll leave you with that. You'll get an email in the next half an hour with all the links that I've been talking about, this last prompt as well. And I hope as many of you as possible or want to join us starting tomorrow every weekday for these little half an hour sessions or the recordings. Again, get in touch if you need a bursary place. I'm just really happy for people to join us at this point. Have a great day, everyone. Enjoy the last day of March.